Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. It's March 1st, the day in history that wakes up, cracks its knuckles, and says, let's cram 3,000 years of human chaos into one calendar square because February clearly didn't have the range. And today's cross-section of global milestones feels less like a neat timeline and more like a historical Costco. Samples everywhere. Nobody knows where anything is, and somehow there's a Roman general in aisle 7 arguing with a 19th century physicist over a bulk pack of uranium salts. So today we dive into a date that built empires, dissolved governments, discovered radioactive decay, sparked independence movements, kidnapped the most famous baby in America, and still had enough room on the calendar to invent the national park. March 1st isn't a day. It's a group chat where every historical event refuses to mute itself. Let's get into it. Segment 1, birth of republics, birth of states, and the American experiment held together with masking tape. March 1st is one of those dates where world history basically said, let's try every form of government and see what melts. We start in 509 BC, when Publius Valerius Publicola marched back into Rome with the first triumph of the brand new Roman Republic. That's right, the Romans fired their king, literally, beat him in a forest, and declared, from now on, we're voting, occasionally, when it doesn't interfere with stabbing each other. It's democracy, but with more sandals. Fast forward to 293 AD, when Emperor Diocletian took one look at the empire, this giant, unwieldy mess stretching from Britain to the Middle East, and basically invented the world's first who's actually in charge here management chart. He split power between 4 rulers. It was like corporate restructuring, but with more beheadings and fewer team-building retreats. Then Europe said, hold my mead, and in 834 restored Louis the Pious to sole rule after his sons had tried to tear the empire into thirds like it was a holiday ham. By 1476, Spain was like, we're tired of all this fragmentation, and the Battle of Toro helped cement Queen Isabella I's claim to Castile, setting the stage for a unified Spain, and eventually funding a man who absolutely did not discover America, but did discover how to get extremely lost. Meanwhile, 1565 gave us the founding of Rio de Janeiro, a tropical paradise born from European expansion, colonization, and the same impulse that made explorers plant flags in places where people already lived. This is mine now. But the biggest March 1st political mic drop comes in 1781, when Maryland finally ratified the Articles of Confederation. This moment legally created the United States, in the same way duct tape legally creates a bridge. Foreign nations went from, who are you again, to, oh, you're like a real country now. But domestically, the Articles created a government so weak it made wet tissue paper look muscular. No executive, no judiciary, no power to tax, no national army, but yes, every state got one vote. Because nothing says functional democracy like Rhode Island having the same federal weight as Virginia. Veterans weren't getting paid, states were acting like 13 separate planets, and the whole thing felt like assembling IKEA furniture without the instructions. The Articles didn't last long, but hey, it's not how well you start, it's whether you eventually fix the mess. And America did, sort of, depending on which century you examine. Then, on March 1st, 1784, Virginia handed over its sprawling Northwest Territory to the federal government, an area so huge it could have eaten several modern states whole. This led to the Northwest Ordinance, the creation of Indiana Territory, Ohio's statehood, and eventually Indiana's own statehood in 1816. All of this came from one date, one deed, and one nation trying to figure out which future states would become calm, measured political entities, and which would end up feverishly arguing on Facebook. And we can't forget March 1st, 1790, the first U.S. Census. The founder said, we need to count literally everyone, but not equally, because this is America. Marshals walked door to door tallying free white males over 16, free white males under 16, free white females, all other free persons, and enslaved people who, courtesy of the 3/5 compromise, counted only partially in the cold math of political power. It's the bureaucratic version of we're all created equal, but some of you are going to be extremely unequal on paper. If segment 1 had a theme, it's this. March 1st is the date governments are born, reorganized, patched together, and, if we're honest, occasionally held up with vibes and a borrowed quill. Segment 2. Science accidentally changes reality, and engineers build a dam big enough to prove they mean it. March 1st also doubles as Science and Engineering Drop the Biggest Plot Twists in Human History Day. In 1896, Henri Becquerel discovered radioactivity entirely by accident, the most powerful scientific revelation since someone said, "Fire, good." He left uranium salts in a drawer with photographic plates, came back later, and realized they'd exposed the plates without sunlight. And instead of saying, weird, he scientifically deduced, the atoms are screaming invisible death rays, and this is probably important. That moment shattered the ancient belief that atoms were solid, indivisible beads. Turns out they're more like cranky little grenades. Radioactivity led to nuclear energy, nuclear medicine, nuclear weapons, basically anything with the word nuclear in it, except those nuclear family sitcoms keep insisting still exist. Then in 1936, the United States completed the Hoover Dam. Proof that America can build incredibly big things when it's desperate, broke, and trying not to drown. A 726-foot tall concrete wall holding back the Colorado River, generating enough electricity to power entire cities, and creating Lake Mead, a reservoir so large it now serves as a visual stress test for climate anxiety. Because in 2025, the lake levels are so low that the waterline looks like the earth forgot to blend its contour makeup. But the dam remains monumental engineering. Thousands of workers, 4 million cubic yards of concrete, and a hydroelectric plant humming with enough power to make Las Vegas glow like a neon fever dream. Yet even this marvel couldn't escape global tension. Post 9/11 security concerns rerouted traffic. Climate change keeps draining the reservoir, and everything about it screams, this is what happens when humans decide to bully a river into obedience. And before America tried controlling rivers, it tried saving landscapes. On March 1st, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant created Yellowstone National Park, the world's first national park, proving sometimes our best historical decisions involve not building something. Yellowstone is geysers, hot springs, herds of wildlife, and 17 million annual photos of Old Faithful erupting on schedule like the world's most punctual boiling tantrum. But it wasn't a story without tragedy. Native tribes were forcibly displaced. Early superintendents had no funding. Poachers acted like the park was a wildlife buffet, and eventually the U.S. Army had to take charge. The National Park Service wouldn't be created for 44 years. So yes, Yellowstone was beautiful, revolutionary, historic, and managed at first with the same organizational energy as a middle school bake sale. Segment 3. Violence, resistance, and the evolution of justice on a day that refuses to be quiet. March 1st is also the date history chose for uprisings, massacres, civil rights battles, and legal turning points so dramatic they feel scripted. In 1562, the massacre of Wassy ignited the French Wars of Religion, when armed men stormed a Huguenot gathering and slaughtered worshippers. France spent decades in bloody conflict, a lesson in how religious extremism tends to create more winnows than wisdom. Jump to March 1st, 1875, when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1875, America's big Reconstruction-era attempt to stop racial discrimination in public accommodations. Spoiler, it did not stick. The Supreme Court struck it down in 1883. Reconstruction collapsed, and Jim Crow said, "Don't worry, I'll handle things from here." Sometimes history feels like a trampoline. Progress goes up, reaction yanks it right back down. Meanwhile, in Korea, on March 1st, 1919, the March 1st movement erupted, millions protesting Japanese colonial rule. A declaration of independence read nationwide, civilians demonstrating in the streets. And the Japanese response? Brutal crackdowns, thousands dead, tens of thousands arrested, and entire communities burned. The protests didn't win immediate independence, but they forged a national identity so resilient it would later reshape the peninsula. Then, 1954 brings us to Indiana University, and one of the funniest acts of political defiance in American history, the Green Feather Movement. During McCarthyism, a state official tried to ban Robin Hood for being communist. College students heard this and said, "Okay, but what if we throw green feathers everywhere to make you look ridiculous?" And they did, and it spread nationwide. Because nothing defeats authoritarianism faster than well-timed mockery. Finally, March 1st, 2005 gave us Roper versus Simmons, a Supreme Court ruling that executing juveniles violates the Eighth Amendment. It was a major shift in human rights jurisprudence, especially considering earlier centuries were out here like cruel and unusual punishment, never heard of her. From drawing and quartering to boiling to waterboarding, human history has been a very long, very graphic reminder that empathy had to be invented slowly and with many legal rewrites. Segment 4, Crime, Scandal, and the Day American Institutions asked, are we okay? No March 1st retrospective would be complete without crime stories so bizarre they make modern scandals look like mild inconveniences. On March 1st, 1932, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping shook the world. Charles Lindbergh, the aviation superstar, became the center of every newspaper headline when his child was abducted from a second-story nursery using a homemade ladder. The ransom notes, the botched investigation, the cemetery drop-offs, the trail of gold certificates. It was a circus so chaotic it practically invented modern criminal forensics by accident. And the tragedy only deepened when the child was later found dead, pushing Congress to pass the Federal Kidnapping Act, giving the FBI nationwide jurisdiction. Eventually, Bruno Hauptmann was arrested with ransom money in his garage, accused of crafting the ladder, matching handwriting samples, and leaving behind more clues than a villain in an early Batman comic. He denied everything until the end, but the evidence towered over him like a poorly assembled wooden ladder with very incriminating lumber. Then leap to 1974. When March 1st became the day the Watergate scandal turned into a demolition derby of indictments. 7 top Nixon officials, the Watergate 7, were charged with conspiracy, perjury, obstruction, and generally treating democracy like a frat house prank gone wrong. These indictments cut straight through the White House firewall and made it clear the cover-up wasn't just a mistake, it was a lifestyle. 5 months later, Nixon resigned because on March 1st, accountability decided to clock in early and work overtime. Segment 5, Culture, Music, Cinema, Athletics, and the Global Soft Power Parade. If March 1st were only about governments collapsing and radioactive discoveries melting everyone's eyebrows, that would be enough. But no, this day also delivers artists, athletes, musicians, and Hollywood milestones like it's trying to win trivia night by itself. On March 1st, 1961, John F. Kennedy created the Peace Corps, a diplomatic innovation powered by soft idealism and hard jet lag. Young Americans went abroad to teach, farm, build, and represent the country, all while living in the same conditions as the communities they served. It was international aid, Cold War strategy, and youthful optimism blended in one program, and it changed U.S. foreign relations for decades. Literature also shows up big with the 1940 release of Richard Wright's Native Son, a novel so unflinching in its critique of systemic racism that many Americans realized they'd been reading books that were way too polite for far too long. Film history checks in via Alain Resnais, who passed away on March 1st, 2014. whose works like Hiroshima Mon Amour gave cinema permission to get philosophical, non-linear, and emotionally devastating in that uniquely French, we're smoking and contemplating trauma way. Then 1998 arrives, and Titanic becomes the first film to crack $1 billion, proving that James Cameron can spend more money than a small nation and still walk away with a profit the size of a medium nation. Actors born on March 1st include Lupita Nyong'o, who won an Oscar with her very first film role, plus Ron Howard and Javier Bardem, who between them represent approximately half of Hollywood's award shelf. Music? March 1st is basically a Spotify playlist called History, but make it interesting. Chopin was born on this date in 1810, redefining the piano. Glenn Miller in 1904. Harry Belafonte in 1927, and on the chaotic end of the spectrum, Jim Morrison got arrested in 1969 for indecent exposure at a concert. March 1st contains multitudes, from classical genius to rock star chaos to the release of Dark Side of the Moon in 1973, which is basically the soundtrack of every college student discovering their existential crisis for the first time. Sports also get a turn. March Madness terminology begins. NYU loses a massive upset game in 1948. Primo Carnera defends his heavyweight title in 1934. The Cleveland Indians break segregation patterns in 1947 spring training, and Mickey Mantle retires in 1969. If March 1st had an athletic identity, it would be a coach yelling, "Push harder, history." In conclusion, a single date, March 1st, gives us republics rising and falling, scientists unlocking the atom, independence fighters resisting empire, legal systems redefining human rights, national parks preserving beauty, kidnappings reshaping law enforcement, corruption collapsing presidencies, artists shifting culture, musicians reshaping sound, and athletes redefining excellence. It is a kaleidoscope of human ambition, cruelty, creativity, protest, and perseverance. It proved that history doesn't unfold in orderly centuries. It crashes into us in messy, overlapping bursts, all on the same square of the calendar. March 1st is not quiet. It is not subtle. It is not patient. It is humanity, condensed, accelerated, and refusing, utterly refusing to be boring.